Walter Williams, let me ask you about socialism. You know, Bernie Sanders is out there pushing socialism. They don't call it socialism because they know that word's not popular, but that's what it is. They're pushing some form of socialism. Free college, free health care. They talk about Scandinavia. Does socialism create wealth and opportunity and success?
Well, we might first start off with what is socialism.
Yeah.
And socialism or communism is government ownership and or control over the means of production. And in that sense, we have a lot of socialism already in our country, and we find people asking for more of it. But if you look around the world, and you ask, in what countries are people better off? Let's say you have a higher per capita income. And that is, if you can rank countries towards countries on the free market end of the spectrum towards it, and countries towards the socialist end of the spectrum, you'll find that the countries towards the free market, their people are richer. And also, it's something else that's rather remarkable. If you rank countries according to Freedom House or Amnesty International, you find greater protections of personal liberty in those countries towards the free market or the capitalist end of the economic spectrum. And if you want to find poverty and abuse and human rights violations, you find them in the socialist/communist countries all over the world. And so anybody asking for socialism in our country, they're really asking for us to be less free. And we have a large amount of socialism right now. We're not nearly as free as individuals as we used to be. And just one argument here is that the founding fathers of our country, they went to war with the most powerful nation on the face of the earth because they did not want to work 2 weeks for King George. But you and I, we're working 4 months of the year in order to pay taxes. So,
do you think part of the problem here is branding, marketing, the lack of articulate conservatives among many of the political leaders in the Republican Party or on the right? I mean, I rarely hear them talk about first principles, individualism, liberty. You know, we talk about millennials, how so many of them are liberal, but they're also, in many respects, anti-authority. And we don't explain our ideas and our philosophies. When I hear Republican leaders in Congress talk, they're talking like, you know, they're GS-13s at the Department of Education or something or other. The left is out there pushing their ideology, which, I'd like your opinion on this, I think is dressed up as populism. But in the end, it has nothing to do with it. It's all about centralization and iron-fisted control. But so-called conservatives and Republicans, they don't even counter this stuff. Am I right about that?
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that the real job that we have that confronts us is to somehow be able to sell our fellow Americans on the moral superiority of personal liberty. We have to convince our fellow Americans on the moral superiority of personal liberty and its main ingredient, which is limited government. You know, the average American, he hides the kind of tyranny from himself. You know, for example, let's say that there's a lady down the street.
2049.
She can't mow her lawn. She doesn't have enough money to pay somebody to mow her lawn. And you ask the average American, would you support the government forcing someone to go down and mow her lawn each week? He said, no, we wouldn't do that. Or you say, well, would you support somebody having to go down at the end of each week and pull money out of his wallet to give her money? They say no. But you ask, well, what about if we all put our money in the government pot? And the government sends money out to this lady. Oh, they say, well, that's different. That's okay.
That's democratic.
But all these three examples I just
gave
involve the forcible use of one person to serve the purpose of somebody else. But that's what the American people want. Too many of us want that, the forcible use of one person to serve the purpose of somebody else. And that's, by the way, a very good working definition of slavery.
Well, you know, when you bring up the founders of this country, the left immediately talks about slave owners, that they were slave owners. But first of all of them weren't. Some of them were. Some of them owned slaves and wanted to get rid of the whole notion of slavery, but they couldn't. And Abraham Lincoln talks to this in his great 1858 speech, debate with Douglas. And I want to know your opinion of this. He said, these are the men that wrote the Declaration of Independence. There's not a word of slavery in there. There's not a word about race in there. They left it to their children and their grandchildren to try and resolve what they could not resolve. How do you answer this?
Well, I think, first of all, we need to recognize that slavery has been mankind's normal state of affairs for centuries. Matter of fact, the word slave comes from Slavs. They were among the first slaves. It turns out that the Africans were the last people to be enslaved. And it turns out also that the Western world, most notably Great Britain, France, and the United States, paid a huge cost to get rid of slavery, whereby in other parts of the world, slavery still exists today in some places in the Middle East. But the West, they made a great effort to get rid of slavery, and also we make
This
many
guy is-
quotations from the founders
Levin guy.
that they looked at slavery as an
This
abomination.
Levin guy, man. He's
But
manipulating this whole
we could not have been a
situation.
nation.
Subject for
We could not have had the ratification
need
of
for
the
slaves he
Constitution
wants.
without allowing the
Not him,
South
the other
to,
guy. Hey, caramba.
maintain slavery.
That's an excellent point. In other words, if there hadn't been a union, I guess there wouldn't have been a civil war. Obviously, one of the primary purposes of the Civil War was to eliminate slavery, over 700,000 casualties. But I also find it interesting that this will be raised, and look, it's a dark mark on American
Yeah, but
history.
he just said there is slavery.
But many of the people who raise it then excuse the 100 million deaths resulting from Marxism, which you pointed out earlier.
Oh, yeah.
And they push an ideology that's progeny, in my view, is progressivism. Progressivism is it not part and parcel of that ideology?
That's right. And communism accounts for the
There we go with the
greatest
communism.
destruction of human life. That is, Hitler did
Shared
not
everything.
compare to Stalin and Mao Zedong
In numbers. Yeah.
in numbers.
And again, when you look at the Third Reich or communism, whether it's Stalin or Mao or whatever, these are all ideologies on amok. And the whole point of our constitutional system is to ensure that government is limited so that the people are as free as they possibly can be
That's right.
in order to avoid circumstances like that, correct?
You're absolutely right. Yes. Yes.
All right. When we return, I want to ask Dr. Williams about the gun debate that's going on today.
No,
Our
no more.